Hello and welcome to this revision blast. We're going to be looking at differential educational achievement today in this webinar. The format for today is 15 multiple choice questions, which obviously you don't have that style question in your exam, but it's just to get you to think about some topics here. After each question, pause the video, I'll prompt you to do so, and have a think about what your answer is, and then we'll check it. You can keep your own score as we go. Okay, here we go then. Question 1. Pierre Bourdieu's idea of habitus is most closely associated with the concept of what? Is it cultural deprivation, material deprivation, symbolic capital, or cultural capital? Pause your video now. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. It is cultural capital, D. It's an interesting analytical point to think about here, the difference between a lack of cultural capital and cultural deprivation. They are quite different, even though they seem similar. Cultural deprivation suggests that some cultures are superior to others, whereas cultural capital suggests that some cultures are more valuable in certain situations, in this case, in education. Okay, question 2. Sue Sharp compared girls' priorities and expectations in the 1970s and 1990s, 1960s and 1980s, 1980s and 2000s, or 1950s and 1990s. Pause your video now. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. It is A, the 1970s and 1990s. A way to remember that, and the reason why it's important to try and remember it, is that Sue Sharp did her original research looking at what impact the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act had, and obviously both of these came in the 1970s. That's why she looked at it originally and then revisited it nearly 20 years later. Okay, we're going to look at two statements. We've got to decide whether they're true or false. Statement 1, Bernstein argues that middle-class children are only able to use the elaborate code. And statement 2, teachers are unable to understand what students mean when they use the restricted code. Okay, pause your video. Okay, we'll have a look at the answer. It is D. Both of the statements are false. Bernstein argued that middle-class children can use the elaborate code. They are able to do it, but they're also able to use the restricted code. They can switch between the two. Teachers can do this also. Teachers will use the restricted code in ordinary everyday speech. The point is that the elaborate code is what is used in education. It's the language of education. It's used in the textbooks, the questions, and will get better marks in exams. Okay, question 4. This one's got a sort of research methods element to it now, and next few have. Rosenthal and Jacobson carried out a field experiment to test the self-fulfilling prophecy. This study generated useful qualitative data, quantitative data, secondary data, very reliable data. Have a think about it and pause your video to come up with your answer. So the correct answer is B, quantitative data. We might have expected it to be qualitative data because the self-fulfilling prophecy is a concept that we associate with interactionism and Becker and labelling theory, but this field experiment generated quantitative data. We could see the IQ test results. You might also have gone for very reliable data as it was an experiment. However, certain things affect its reliability, which is the point of the next question. Which of these impacts the reliability of Rosenthal and Jacobson's study? Is it a lack of rich qualitative data, ethical concerns about the long-term impact on the pupils, inability to control variables, or teachers acting as gatekeepers? Remember, all of these might affect the study in various ways, but which affects its reliability? Pause your video. Okay, looking at the answer now. It is C, the inability to control variables. That's what stops it from being reliable. That's why you couldn't do a couple of these studies and be sure that the reason for the changes to do between them is just because of the self-fulfilling prophecy. All the others might have an impact it didn't produce lots of rich qualitative data, that would affect its validity. There were ethical concerns. Teachers might have acted as gatekeepers. They might have said, you can't do this study, which would have affected its practicality. Okay, question 6, still in methodology. Paul Willis used methodological pluralism, that means using a number of research methods, not just one, in his study of the lads in a Wolverhampton school. Which of these methods did he not use? Group interviews, participant observation, non-participant observation, or official statistics? Pause your video. Okay, the answer is D, official statistics. Why might you have thought D could have been a right answer? Because often when people do methodological pluralism, they are seeking to triangulate. They're seeking to use qualitative and quantitative data to produce results that are both reliable and valid. But Paul Willis wasn't really interested in that. He was doing what we might describe as an ethnographic study. He was looking much more at people's behaviour in this particular group, and was interested in valid data rather than reliable data. But he did use a range of methods to get that. Okay, question 7. Willis's study is called Learning to Labour. How did he argue that education prepared working class boys for their working lives? Did it teach them important necessary skills? Did it teach them discipline, respect, and passivity? Did it help develop a coping strategy for boredom, which was messing about? Or did it brainwash them with bourgeois ideology? Pause your video. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. The correct answer is C. It helped them develop this coping strategy, messing about. If we look at the other possibilities, functionalists would certainly argue that education teaches people important necessary skills for their working lives. Both functionalists and Marxists would say it teaches discipline, respect, and certainly Marxists would add passivity through the kind of hidden curriculum. And Willis is a neo-Marxist, so you might expect him to look at that. But the boys he studied were anything but passive, and they certainly didn't have any discipline or show any respect. And he didn't really see much evidence of them being brainwashed with bourgeois ideology, although they did have some kind of bigoted views. But very much they realised they were going to have a pretty boring life doing boring work, and that they could cope with that by messing about and not taking it very seriously. Question 8. Pupils from which of these ethnic groups, on average, performed best in GCSEs in 2014? Was it Chinese, Indian, White British, or Irish traveller? Just bear in mind that a couple of these were very close, and so if you answer either of those, you're certainly along the right lines. Okay, pause your video now. Okay, what was the answer? It was A, Chinese. The difference between the Chinese and Indian pupils was very narrow indeed. So in that particular year, 74% of Chinese pupils got 5 GCSEs A star to C, 73% of Indian pupils did, 56% of White British, and 14% of Irish traveller. Okay, question 9. In 2014 again, pupils from which of these backgrounds performed best at GCSE? White girls, black boys, or white boys? Okay, pause your video. Okay, let's have a look. It was black girls, and that might be surprising because we know African Caribbean pupils generally did less well than white British pupils. But the girls actually did better, and it's worth thinking about that when you answer a question about who does best, particularly with ethnicity. I would say try to avoid making a very generalised point that minority ethnic pupils do less well than majority population pupils. It's often a lot more nuanced than that, and both these last two questions point to that. Okay, question 10. In which of these categories do boys beat girls in education? Okay, there have to be some, don't there? So is it the percentage getting A star to C at GCSE? Is it those getting A stars at A level? Is it those getting A's at A level? Or is it the number of people entering A-levels altogether. Pause your video. Okay, let's look at the answers. The answer is B, A stars at A-level, which is an interesting one. In fact, last year, boys, for the first time in a long time, got the most high grades in general, so A stars and A's. But it's really since the A star came in, they've been getting the most A stars. So you can have a think about that. Why are they passing less well in general than girls, but more of them getting A stars? Okay, question 11. The achievement gap between those who are eligible for free school meals and those who are not is consistently around, is it 5 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 25 to 30%, or less than 5%? Just a quick reminder about what the achievement gap is. If I use a kind of invented one, say 55% of girls got 5 GCSEs at A star to C, and 50% of boys did, that would be an achievement gap of 5%. Okay, so think about that in terms of this question. Pause your video. Okay, let's see how you did. The answer is 25 to 30%, which is a very high gap, and it has to be said that social class is by far the strongest determinant out of these three, gender, ethnicity and social class, of educational achievement. Just to give an example of that, the 2014-15 year, 60% of children who were not eligible for free school meals got 5 GCSEs at A star to C, compared with 33% of those who were eligible for free school meals. So 27% that year, but it's consistently around that level. Okay, question 12. Which of these is a strong criticism of the idea that a feminisation of education has caused girls to outperform boys? Girls are still outperforming boys on the new GCSEs. Head teachers and senior managers are usually men. Vocational courses such as childcare or construction involve more coursework. Or the current education secretary is a man. Okay, all of those could be criticisms of the idea that a feminisation of education has caused girls to outperform boys, but which would you say was the strongest criticism? Okay, pause your video. Okay, let's have a look. It is A. It's about the new GCSEs, because the new GCSEs had the coursework taken out of them, and yet the girls are still outperforming the boys. So if one suggested aspect of a feminisation of education was that there was more coursework, that's no longer the case, but girls are still outperforming boys. Okay, question 13. Bit of a curveball here. Don't worry, this isn't testing your sociological knowledge. It's just to raise an interesting point about social class and educational achievement. Try and answer this real 11 plus test question from the 1950s. Which is the odd one out? Okay, I'm not even going to read them out because then some of them are unpronounceable. But which one would you say was the odd one out? Imagine you were 11 and this was going to decide whether you went to the grammar school or the secondary one. Okay, pause your video. Okay, let's have a look. So it was B, and it's because they are anagrams. The first one's Mozart, the second one's Freud, the third one's Brahms, and the last one's Handel. And the odd one out is the one who was a psychologist rather than a classical composer. Why is this of any interest? Because the point that you can take from this is that this test was meant to be testing intelligence, who could do an anagram, but really it was testing knowledge and cultural capital, because he didn't just have to do the anagrams, you needed to be aware of classical composers and psychologists. Okay, question 14, another one with some statements. So we've got statement 1. Mack and Gale argues that one reason for girls outperforming boys in school is a crisis of masculinity. And statement 2. To find employment, it is more important today than in the 1960s and 70s for boys to leave school with qualifications. Okay, have a look at through A, B, C and D. Which of these combinations do you think is right? Pause the video. Okay, let's have a look at the answer. It is A. Both statements are true. Mack and Gale does suggest a crisis of masculinity is a reason for why girls outperform boys, or particularly why boys underperform, because they don't know what their role in society is anymore. But it's also true, and these two statements are interesting when you put them together, it's also true that back in the 60s and 70s, if boys left school without qualifications, it was less important than it is today, because there might be manual jobs to go to that didn't require formal qualifications. So that's an interesting analytical point to add to Back-and-Gale's study. Okay, and finally question 15. Two more statements. Asian children who speak a different language at home generally speak English as well as those for whom it is a first language by the age of 16. And language barriers tend to remain a problem for second and third generation immigrant children. Okay, what I want you to think about again is whether those statements are true or false. Try and decide which of those four combinations is correct. Pause the video now. Okay, let's have a look. And the correct answer is B. The first statement is true and the second is false. So research has shown that language differences don't make a huge amount of difference for Asian children by the time you get to GCSE. And so if you're looking for explanations for differential educational achievement by ethnicity, language, for that reason might not be the strongest. And similarly with statement 2, actually second and third generation immigrant children don't have the sorts of language barriers that newly arrived immigrants might have, and therefore again it's probably not, language is probably not a particularly strong argument to explain why there is differential educational achievement by ethnicity. Okay, I hope you found that useful. We're going to be doing several more of these webinars, and there'll be further videos to check out, and also have a look on Tutor to Use Sociology webpage to look at some of the other resources that we have available in the build up to the exams. And very good luck.